are your resources, location, your garden style, your strain and plant selection, and your soil, water, and nutrients. So these are all the kinds of things that you should consider before you even get a plant or pop a seed or any of that. So, so a few things to think about. Your resources include your knowledge. How much do you know about growing? Time. How much time do you have to dedicate to your garden? Money. How much money do you have to dedicate to your garden? Space. Do you have outdoor space to grow a garden? You'd be surprised, even with the smallest spaces, you can use containers and other methods to grow your own, even on a patio. And materials. What kinds of materials do you have? Some people already have a bunch of different kinds of garden equipment that they already use, and they can just co-opt that into their cannabis garden. So some important things about location to consider. It may be the biggest issue when growing outdoors, specifically because of all of the restrictions. So you need to know your local laws and regulations. I went on to Cal Normal and picked up this handy guide to what's legal and what isn't after Prop 64. So it helps you understand what you can and what you can't do. If you're a valid patient, which under the current legislation, as far as I'm aware, means you have to have a county issued or state issued ID card. And if you possess that and a medical cannabis recommendation from your doctor, then you are subject to different limitations than those people under Prop 64. So it's important to know those differences and those distinctions. Also need to know right now, there's nothing official that I found from the city of Vallejo regarding outdoor cultivation. So it's legal except for commercial cultivation. So private cultivation is still currently legal in the city of Vallejo outdoors. I did some research on Solano County, unincorporated Solano County, and it was difficult to discern exactly what the legal standing is right now because there was a moratorium on it that they extended, and then they met to extend it again, but as far as I can find, they didn't actually extend the moratorium. They just decided to draft an ordinance to completely restrict any type of cultivation, manufacture, or anything in unincorporated Solano County. So as far as that stands now, as far as I'm aware, that moratorium has expired. It has not been extended. So until the other ordinance is put in place, which I was unable to find online, I would say, 6 plants and, practice as good neighbor policy as you can. So those are a couple of things that I found out in terms of where we are right now. Some other things to consider are the number of hours of direct sunlight. You really only need 4 to 6 hours of direct sunlight per day. The more sativa a variety is, typically the more sunlight it prefers. But anywhere between 5 and 8 hours of direct sun is plenty for most of the hybrid varieties that we have. It's very rare where you're going to find a sativa variety that's so sativa unless you have something really unique or you're growing something like super silver haze that's very, very sativa dominant. I'd say anywhere between 4 to 8 hours of direct sun will do just fine. One of the biggest things you got to worry about though actually is your ambient lighting at night. So a lot of us might have yards, but a lot of us also might have neighbors that have really bright night lights. Like I have a neighbor who has like at least 400 watt LED security light. So I either need to find a way to screen that or I can't grow there because that ambient light at night will just mess everything up. You need that darkness as well as that sunlight. Another thing to consider is your security. Now that cannabis is more legal and more people will be growing it, there are still regulations, like you're supposed to keep your flowers after they're harvested in a locked box on your premises. Cultivation in certain areas needs to be certain distance from the edge of your property. There's various things like that to consider. Can it be seen from the street? Do your neighbors know? Are they cool with it? A lot of times your neighbors are actually your biggest security issue. If you make really good friends with your neighbors and you let them know what's up, and that they're cool and you don't have any problems, you can actually get extra security from your neighbors. Like, they can actually watch out for you, which is even better. So good neighbor policy really is one of the best things you can practice when it comes to cultivation, especially outdoors. Your native soil structure is something else to consider. A lot of us here have clay. Clay is very heavy, it's very hard to work with, but there are ways around it and ways to manage it. And within a couple of years, if you know what you're doing and you add the right things, you can really turn that clay into a really decent garden soil. It's actually kind of easy once you know how, and it doesn't really take that much work. And everybody's always afraid of all the work involved in gardening. If you let Mother Nature do the work for you, it's a whole lot easier. Microclimates. There are a lot of microclimates in the Bay Area. There are a lot of microclimates in your yard. So make sure that you know that area is hot and dry, because it gets this kind of sun, it's next to the house is made of concrete. Like, you need to know all those things. Just like you need to know the number of hours of direct light, you need to know where the path of that light is. You need to know how the angle of the sun changes throughout the year. So you need to know, in fall, are you going to get the same light that you got in spring, or is it changed? Do you get shading in the fall that you didn't have in the spring? And that's very important, because shading in the fall will make your ripening time that much longer. So and it'll also lead you more susceptible to different mold, pests, disease, stuff like that. Stress the plant out a lot as well. And your water source. I know a lot of us take the water source thing for granted, but that's because we basically have tap water. Vallejo tap water's pH is 8.0, so it's extraordinarily high. And there's a lot of chlorine and chloramine in it. So even though you have a clean water source, it may not be the best water source. So it's important to know, and it's also important to know where that water source is. Like, even if you're in your own house, you may have 2 or 3 hose spigots outside your house, or you may have 1. You need to know where that 1 is compared to where you want to put your garden, so you know how much hose you're going to need. How are you going to determine what watering you're going to want to do? If it's 200 feet, you got to drag that hose. You may reconsider hand watering your plants. So basically, one of the things you got to figure out is, how do you want your garden to grow? Like, what works best for you? As you can see, these are all various styles of growing cannabis. We have raised beds, planter boxes. We have big fabric pots. We have garden right in the ground, and then we have pots. So as you can see, gardening can be as flexible as you want it to be. So based on your needs, you can pretty much find a way to grow plants anywhere. It's kind of awesome. So basically what I recommend when it comes to figuring out what kind of garden style you do want is to keep it simple and try to go what works best for you. Like, know yourself. Do you tend to your plants a lot? Do you like to baby them? Do you like to spend time with them? Do you like watering them by hand? Do you like doing all of that? Or do you not have the time for any of that, and you just want to come in and visit and see how they're doing, and do a couple of easy tasks here and there, maybe some manicuring, maybe just fill your water and let pH it and all that stuff. So you got to choose whether you want to do hand watering or irrigation system. So once you decide if you want to do raised beds, pots, or put them in the ground, then you got to figure how you're going to water them, by hand or an irrigation system. And irrigation systems can be as simple or as complicated as you want to make them. You can take a soda bottle filled with water, turn it upside down, and that is an irrigation system. It can last anywhere from a few days to a week, depending on the size of the plant in the pot. It's one of the simplest ways to water your plants. Another good way I found while I was doing research was putting a 5-gallon bucket with a 3/8 inch hole in it, and then run some tubing down underneath the pot. You can fill the water from the top, it goes down to the tubing into the ground and waters the plant roots. So there's lots of different things that you can do. And then you have to decide what kind of nutrients, amendments, teas, what kind of things you're going to do there. Are you going to do salt-based fertilizers? You're going to do all organics? You're going to do a blend? Are you going to add your nutrients in liquid, solid? And then training, pruning, and trellising. How are you going to manage your plant growth? As your plant is growing, what are you going to do to manage the height, to manage the size, to improve your yield? those are all also things that you need to consider, like what size space do you have? Then you need, once you have a size space restriction, now you need to know, okay, I need to train and prune and trellis this so that it can fit into this size restriction. So hand watering is not bad, and irrigation is not necessarily good. It just depends on really what's better for you. Irrigation systems can leak and you can waste water, but they're also can be really efficient if they're done right, especially if you add mulch and you put the drip underneath. It can really lower the amount of water that you use. Hand watering, you spend a little bit more time with the plant, you get a feel for the soil better. I feel like you get a better understanding of how much water the plant is actually using when you hand water. And also you can use the hose as a form of pest control too. So like while you're hand watering your plants, especially while they're vegetatively growing, you can just spray them off and spray off any whiteflies or aphids. Spraying them off with a hose is one of the best ways to control aphids on your plants anyway. And then you got to figure out what strains and what plants you're going to choose. Now, believe it or not, one of the books I really like for information is Uncle Ed Rosenthal's Big Book of Buds.
Yeah.
He gives a lot of really good strain-specific information in these books about these different strains, and they tell you a lot about each one. And you can also go online. There's a bunch of different websites. One of the ones that I happen to like is seedfinder.eu. That gives you the genetic history of a lot of different strains. So that also gives you an idea of like if that strain comes from parental stock that is resistant to mold and mildew, like Big Bud, for instance. Big Bud was one of those powdery mildew resistant, mold resistant plants that somehow disappeared, but is crossed in a bunch of different things. So if you can find those genetics, then you can find plants that are more mold resistant. That's why seeds versus clones is another thing. This really depends, I think, on how you want to grow. If you want to grow in a raised bed, I think you can grow with seeds or clones, because seed plants typically grow deeper and wider, and clone plants typically grow shallower and mat-like. So a raised bed, you could get away with both, but if you're growing in the ground and it's just kind of amended clay, it's not like a planting hole that you've dug, and I guess even if it is a planting hole that you dug, I would recommend a seed plant in the ground, because the plant roots are going to be more robust and they're going to be able to grow deeper and be more drought tolerant in that situation. In a raised bed, you can get away with clones. Clones typically tend to be a little less hardy, a little less disease and drought resistant for a variety of different reasons than seed plants do. So I'm partial to seeds personally, but there are plenty of people who grow clones outdoors just fine. So it really is what works best for you. If you have the extra time to start your seeds indoors and you want to go through the time that it takes to sex them and grow them out and then put them in the ground so that later on you have less to worry about. You know, if you're not as strong a gardener, maybe you want to go with a seed plant, because that seed plant's probably going to be a little bit easier for you to grow. That being said, know whether it's an indoor or outdoor variety that you're choosing. Typically, most cannabis can grow outdoors. However, because in the last 40 years, cannabis was driven underground, a lot of genetics became less robust in organic conditions outdoors because they were catered to indoors in environments that were fully managed. So some of them are less hardy outdoors. That doesn't mean that they can't necessarily be grown outdoors. It just means you better be a better gardener in order to accomplish that. And they may not yield as well, and they may be more difficult to grow. So choosing varieties that are hardier outdoors, again, Big Bud comes to mind. Actually, Blue Dream is a good outdoor strain, but it's a good example of, it's a good outdoor strain under the right conditions because it's more susceptible to mold. Even though it's mold resistant for some plants, it gets powdery mildew and bud mold more so than, say, Big Bud would. So if you're a novice gardener, something like Big Bud would be a better choice for you than even Blue Dream. Even though Blue Dream is typically a more easy to grow strain, it could be tricky outdoors if you have really wet ground, or you get really bad shade, or you don't know how to manicure and prune the plant really well. and you get a lot of growth. So know your garden and yourself on that note. Know if you're gonna be able to prune your plants, you know how to prune your plants. Know what kind of work schedule you have and how much knowledge you have. If you know those things about yourself, then designing a garden that works for you is a whole lot easier. And be honest with yourself, don't think of like, this is what I want to do versus this is what I will do. Think about what you will do and then work toward what you want to do. Because if you go for what you will do, then you can keep it really simple. And then you can elaborate and tweak and do different things as you learn and grow, which is really, I think, the way to do things. And when it comes to outdoor growing, seeds versus clones doesn't matter because you gotta harden them both off anyway. So they both have to be set aside in a protected area for between a week to 2 weeks. Cannabis is fairly forgiving in hardening off because it's a pretty sturdy plant. And it can take a lot of light, so it's really difficult to give it a sunburn, but you can do it. The trick is to really just make sure that you water it and you keep it in a protected area. Give it morning light or afternoon light. Try to keep it out of the midday sun if you can. You'll see them start to grow. They'll get the stems will get sturdier, the plants will get more robust, the leaves will get larger. And you'll see them start to really grow in the light, which is nice. So now we come to figuring out your soil, your water, and your nutrients, which are pretty much your basics outdoors that you can control for the most part. Typically you think of growing, the term is FLAW, food, light, air, and water. Outdoors, your air is a little kind of tricky because you don't really have a whole lot of choice in the air that's there. You can add fans if you have like patio areas that tend to bake in the sun. You can add fans and stuff like that. But still, you're not going to really cool it down that much. You're kind of stuck as to like what the air quality is like. So the food, the water, and the media that you choose can be really important. So there's soil, peat moss based and car based potting mixes that you can use. You can use them in pots by themselves, or you can amend them into the ground to add organic material to the ground that you have. Filtering your water. I recommend filtering water with at least a carbon filter. Simple, single stage, catches sediment and removes chlorine and chloramine. That is your biggest enemy when it comes to your water in your house. Plus, if you have really old galvanized pipes like I do in my house, it also helps keep all the sediment and the stuff that is in the pipes out of your plants, which is really nice. So I recommend everybody filter their water. Reverse osmosis I think is overkill for outdoor. I think it's a little overkill for indoor. But more than anything, it wastes water. And to me, I try to keep the inputs in my garden as minimal as possible so that I can save money and only give the plants exactly what they need. There are some amendments that really make a difference, and we're going to talk about those a little bit in detail. And fertilizers, there is a bazillion different types of fertilizer. We can sit here and talk all night long about fertilizers. You just really have to decide how you want to do your fertilizers. I like to do a combination of a few different things. So you have liquid fertilizers, solid fertilizers, and those can be applied either as a tea, in your watering, top dressing, or layering in your holes. So typically for organic fertilizers and amendments, I like to do a layer at the bottom and then top dress throughout the season. In my pots, I like to mix some in and then top dress throughout the season and then add teas. So depending on what kind of system you want to set up and how much work you want to put into it, you can do as little or as much work as you want. And I know that's not like a really good answer, but unfortunately there's a million ways you can do this. So taking your situation and saying, I have this is what I'm working with, and then going from that, I think is always the best way to start. So these are some soils and cocoa core and whatnot. These are actually both soil mixes. They actually have like composted wood composted.
Forest material or
Thank you.
something like that?
Thank you. Composted forest material of some sort. I'm a little leery of those kinds of soil mixes because if the forest stuff isn't composted well, you can get things that you don't want in that soil. Like root aphids, for instance, or bad fungus or bacterial.
Fungus gnats?
Fungus gnats. Actually, Fox Farm is notorious for having fungus gnats in their stuff. Yeah.
Mites too?
I've never seen mites. I've seen living things.
Yeah.
Like I've seen, I'll show you a few different living things that you'll find in your soil too, so you can figure out what the good guys are and what the bad guys are. But that's why I typically stay away, and I just go with Pro Mix. The Pro Mix is actually a trick I picked up when I worked at the nursery. So even in a commercial nursery, that's what they were using. And they were using the high porosity with the mycorrhizae inoculant. So this comes inoculated with a mycorrhizal inoculant, which is basically a fungus that lives with your roots to help them be more efficient at absorbing things and getting rid of things in the soil. So it being there from the beginning helps keep the bad guys from getting there. There's already something there, so the bad guys can't get there. Whereas with the potting soils, it's kind of dicey. Even if you add the good guys, if the bad guys are already there, you may be adding good guys for nothing. And it might be like just a push-pull. I can guarantee you'll get fusarium and botrytis in your potting soils.
The Pro Mix, would you use that just by itself?
I do use the Pro Mix just by itself when I start seeds and when I start clones. I'll typically use that. I do add, and we'll get to this a little bit in a minute, insect frass, and sometimes I'll add so this down here is basically super soil. It's a bunch of soil mix and amendments that you can put together, and then you can let it sit and decompose so that you can use that as the basis of your potting mix, and you don't need to feed it anything, you just need to water it. And that you don't need to worry about pH. This is probably one of the best, easiest things you can do once you know how. Once you know how to mix the super soil, that is probably the easiest no-brainer way you can grow. Indoors, outdoors, any doors. That one right there, super simple, super simple. Roots Organic, they have their own potting blend. I'm not sure if the 707 mix has dirt in it or not. I don't think so. I think this is similar to the Pro Mix, but a different composition of perlite and earthworm castings and stuff like that. And then there's the Ready Grow. That's your cocoa core. I like cocoa core. You need to be careful mixing the core and the peat moss because they do different things. Peat moss tends to be acidic, and cocoa core tends to hold calcium and magnesium. And if any of you know about cannabis, it loves calcium and magnesium. So if you have your media locking up your calcium and magnesium, as much CalMag as you can throw at it, that's going to suck it up. So if you wonder why you're having calcium deficiency or magnesium deficiency in your cocoa, it's either your pH or your cocoa is just absorbing it. So again, this is a 2-stage water filter. Highly recommend water filters, particularly because the chlorine and the chloramine kills all of the beneficial fungus. So the mycorrhizae that's in this and all of the beneficial bacteria and stuff that are in all these additives, they all get creamed by your chloramine and chlorine. It just kills everything. So it's worth it if you're working hard to make your soil have all this biologic and beneficial activity to not kill it off with chlorine and chloramine. Yeah.
Chloramine, is that the gas form?
No, so chlorine, chloramine is a different type of cleanser, we'll say. It's a sterilizer, but it doesn't off-gas like chlorine does.
Okay.
It stays in the water longer. Okay. So these are some of the amendments I want to talk about. Some of them really make a huge difference in your soil. Some of them make a huge difference to your plant. All of them, if you add them all of them will make a huge difference over time. So one of the cool things about this is the more that you do this year after year, the better your soil gets. So some of the things that I like to add, a dolomite lime, this is absolutely necessary. You need dolomite and you need lime for pH balancing, and it needs to be dolomite because dolomite lime is calcium and magnesium. So this is the calcium and magnesium that you need, and it helps to control your pH as well. So it's a bonus. Then you also have humic acid. This is the opposite side of that pH coin. So as the soil gets more basic, the humic acid dissolves. As the humic acid dissolves, it becomes more acidic, and then the dolomite lime dissolves. And so if you use these in your soil, they help balance the pH naturally. It's a buffer system, if you will. So it becomes a whole lot easier if you just filter the chlorine out and you make sure that your pH is closer to 7 than it is to 8. These two things make it a whole lot easier to just keep that really steady. It's trickier in pots to manage your pH than it is in dirt in the ground. But in dirt in the ground, if you have highly alkalized clay, it can be really tricky to manage your pH. So that's where breaking down the clay, which I'll go over a little bit in a minute, really helps to make things more available and help balance your pH better. So green sand. Green sand is one of those things that breaks down over a long period of time. Azomite is another thing that breaks down over a long period of time. Both of them add different trace minerals to your soil. Both of them are a granular substance that helps break down clay. So sand, coarse sand in particular, and rock, which azomite is, and you can get this in prilled form, which is tiny little balls. These two things help to break the clay apart and help a more organic matter penetrate into it. Speaking of organic matter, the insect frass over here, it's hiding in all of this delicious stuff here. I put this up because this is some basic things that I think everybody should have in their soil. The diatomaceous earth, that makes a huge difference because it's high in silica and it allows your plants to become stronger. It reinforces their cell walls. So it makes them more disease resistant, specifically to things like powdery mildew that likes to settle on the leaf surface and then bloom. Having that diatomaceous earth in there adds that extra silica that makes it a little bit more robust. Mycorrhizae, we talked a little bit about that. There's tons and tons and tons of different varieties of mycorrhizae. They come in all different shapes and sizes. You can get them, I typically get mine already in, they're heavily in compost. Compost is one of your best sources of mycorrhizae and beneficials. Earthworm castings, another great source of beneficials. So you're inoculating beneficials when you're adding those types of things to your soil. I didn't put earthworm castings up here, but I should, because earthworm castings are probably another thing that really make a difference. They add a lot of humic matter to the soil, which helps hold water, and it also helps with aeration. So kind of like perlite, which is another thing that's great to add and also good because it helps break down the clay. Perlite absorbs water and holds air at the same time. So it allows the soil to hold moisture and without drowning your plants. So that's kind of like the best of both worlds. And then if you add some oyster shell or some biochar, which I'll talk a little bit later, that will give a place for all the mycorrhizae and bacteria to live. So if you give them a nice little home to live in, they'll just keep growing and growing, and they'll make your roots really happy and your plants really strong. And then things like this insect frass, which basically boosts the plant's immune system. The insect frass is kind of like worm poop, but from bugs. And because they're land bugs, when you use it as a tea, a foliar spray, or in your soil, the plant reacts like it's being attacked. And what it does is it has this immune response where it produces this enzyme that liquefies the bugs from the inside out. So the shells are made of chitin, and the plants make chitinase, which is an enzyme, and when the bugs eat the plants, they dissolve. So that's why I love this stuff. It's probably the best way to get rid of spider mites that I've ever found. Some really cool things that I found while using it is it actually boosts some terpenes, some unique terpenes, and it produces higher contents of CBG in my plants. Those are a couple of things that I found. Yeah.
Can you use it throughout the life cycle? Is there a certain period you need to stop using something like that, like
I would say you
flowering?
can. No, it does have a little bit of nitrogen, but not enough for it to really matter. I would say I wouldn't use it as a foliar spray after your plants started flowering because it contains microbes that could contaminate your plants, which is why I wouldn't recommend using any kind of compost tea as a foliar after flowering, because even Bacillus thuringiensis, which is a caterpillar killer, can leave a residue in your plants. So you don't even want to spray that on your plants after they start flowering. Unfortunately, there are some good ways to get rid of those that I'll kind of mention in a little bit, but neem oil, the insect frass, and planting plants nearby that the plants like it's called a trap crop. For instance, for budworm, you would plant roses and snapdragons and petunias because budworms really like those. So you plant those away from your plants and the budworms go and inhabit those plants, and your plant has the insect frass and is really healthy, and it's just not hospitable. It's like just doesn't taste good to the bugs, and that's really kind of what you're going for. Kelp meal is also a great one. It adds a lot of organic material as well, but it also adds hormones and some plant auxins, so growth regulators to help boost the plant's growth. Along with kelp meal, I would add cottonseed meal and alfalfa meal as a couple of other meals that I would recommend throwing in there. Cottonseed meal is great. Make sure it's organic because there's a lot of pesticide use in growing cotton and herbicide use, and I wouldn't want anybody's plants to get a dose of Roundup, even if it was a little bit. So go with organic cottonseed meal. But the cottonseed meal helps with pH as well, and it's a high dose of nitrogen and readily accessible food. But cottonseed meal is really good for mycorrhizae and beneficial microbes. It's like extra starter food for them, which I think is really great. So it does kind of the work for you. This is the soil food bug. This is a little bit about what you're going to look for and find in your soil. You have, fungi, nematodes. You have nematodes that eat other nematodes. So you have root-feeding nematodes, and then you have predatory nematodes. These ones eat those. You also have mycorrhizae fungi. This is the good fungus that makes your plant have nutrients and water more readily available. You also have nitrogen fixing and nitrifying bacteria. You can add nitrogen by adding a cover crop to your plants as well, which is a little bit more advanced rather than just straight mulch. Then you have different other single-celled organisms, amoeba, flagellates, protozoas, and whatnot. You have some arthropods, some nematodes that eat fungus, and then your earthworms. And this is most of what's going on in your soil. The more of this that's in your soil, the healthier your soil is. Particularly things like mycorrhizal fungi. The fungal hyphae actually help break up clay. So the more mycorrhizal activity you can get in your clay soil, the faster it'll break up. The faster you can get all of this going, the faster these guys will show up, and the faster the earthworms show up, the faster your soil gets tilled for free. So, this is a little bit, just an overview of some of the things that we do to our soil, and issues that we're facing in terms of soil, and why it's important to keep your soil covered here in California. So there's a lot of compaction and sealing going on from farming, where they just grade the clay down and it makes a hard pan layer. There's all kinds of water issues, acidification, erosion. So if you keep everything covered, then the soil can work to, the plants can keep the nutrients, it sequesters carbon, it keeps the moisture in the ground. It does a lot of, it helps keep the water supply clean. It keeps dust out of the air. So if you have places in your yard or around your house or whatever that aren't covered with something, just throw some straw mulch on top of it, or some bark, or even cardboard, because just covering it can really make a difference. So here's a close-up of the fungus that you're looking for. Typically, if you cover your soil with something and then you peel it back, you'll see stuff like this growing because it's been, nicely covered and protected. These are some of the good guys that you're gonna look for in your garden. So if you see them, it's not a bad thing. Like this guy here, this is a springtail. This is one of the things you'll find in your potting mix. You'll find these in your potting mix that you get with the composted forest materials. You'll get this. I've found millipedes. I've never found a spider, thankfully, but I did find a Jerusalem cricket that wandered out of a bag of soil in our warehouse.
Those are so scary
time,
looking.
That was fun. These are the guys you really want. These are the guys that'll do all the work. These are the guys that'll give you all the best nutrients and turn your soil from, nothing into delicious black gold. So the more of those you can get, the better it's gonna be. If you're looking to improve your native soil, know the kind of soil that you're starting with. I have a handout. So this is a little soil test chart. And basically it's a flow chart on how to test what kind of soil you have just by taking some soil, mixing it with some water, and putting it in your hand and playing with it. Alright, so you can go home and you can see if you really do have clay soil and how much clay it is. If you want to get into like something even fancier, you can find one of these. Another Uncle Ed book. His Grower's Handbook actually has one of these in it. This book probably has as much overview of information as anything. This book covers everything. And that is one of the things I like about the stuff that he makes. But you'll see like what percentage of clay and silt and sand and loam. The darker your soil is, the more loam it has. The red clay is better than gray clay because gray clay is more alkaline. So if you find pockets of gray clay, then you know that you have more alkaline soil. How you find out what your soil is and what kind of soil you're starting with, great, besides playing with your soil and figuring out what the texture and the composition is, get yourself one of these handy dandy things. Super cheap, super easy, works. Basically it's a soil test kit. You take a handful of soil, you mix it with some, I like to use bottled water, but basically anything that doesn't have chlorine in it and is 7.0 will work, distilled, what have you. Mix some soil, mix some water, take one of these little colored pellets, shake them together, match the color, see how much you've got in your dirt. This comes with nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and pH. The green one is the pH, and then all the other ones are color-coded. Some of them, these only have 2 tests, some of them have 4. You can get really fancy with yourself and you can have your soil tested at UC Davis. You can send it off, they'll do a soil test for you. It's actually part of the cooperative exchange, so you can get that done for free. So if you really want to know what exactly is in your dirt, you can find out. Set a realistic time frame for when you're going to remediate your clay and turn it into this luscious garden soil. Like, we know it's going to take a year or 2 if we don't do any work. If we're just letting Mother Nature take its course, it's going to take a couple years before things break down and all the biologic activity turns that soil into something a lot more usable. If we're willing to do some work and we're willing to like open up the clay and we're willing to like mix some things in, things can go a little bit faster than that. You can get rid of most of your weeds, but there are some weeds you cannot get rid of. Bermuda grass is a good example of this. Bermuda grass is virtually impossible to get rid of. You need to dig 8 feet down in order to remove the rhizomes. Without dousing without dousing everything in vinegar and making your soil so acidic nothing will grow in it, or dousing it with chemicals so that nothing grows in it. There is no really good way to get rid of Bermuda grass that I have found yet. That being said, you can try to smother the crap out of it. One thing you can do is, before you start any of your planting, you can burn off all your weeds by putting down black plastic for a couple days, letting the sun bake it off. That will kill everything underneath it right away. After that, you can put down layers of cardboard and add more organic material, and I'll show you the lasagna gardening slide in a minute, and I'll show you all the cool things that you can just add on top of each other, and you don't even have to till it in, because I'm like, the least amount of work, the better. So make amends because organic matters, and that's amendments and organic material. The right amendments and enough organic material in your soil will change everything. So adding the green sand, adding the azomite, getting those trace minerals, that really does make a huge difference. Making sure you have enough organic matter makes a huge difference, especially in sandier soils. In clay, you can add organic matter and it fluffs the soil up, but it's only temporary, which is why you need to add the coarse sand and like some pea gravel or perlite, and you can add chunks of perlite. You can even add chunks of dolomite lime that are large rock that will break down over a longer period of time. They won't have as good an effect on your pH control, but it will add silica and it will add that magnesium and calcium over a long period of time. And that will allow you to harvest better crops year after year. So starting with the first 2 years, you put a lot of stuff in. After that, you just do minimal stuff over time, and it just gets better and better. And the soil is central to everything else. So this is talking about food, but we can use it in terms of cannabis as well. Soil health, your soil health is the basis, the foundation, the fundamental thing that everything else derives from. Without good soil, you don't have a healthy plant. Without a healthy plant, you got a lot of work. So it can improve shelf life, all of that stuff can be improved by having good soil. It can improve the ecosystem. Having good soil helps to retain water. It helps prevent flooding. It helps to improve soil percolation so that water can stay in the soil longer. It also sequesters carbon and it increases biodiversity in the soil. But here's where it really makes a difference to me. Is in the crop cost. Inputs and labor are lower. Pest disease resistance is increasing. Yields increase. And crop yield is increased. If I was somebody who's looking to save money and to get more bang for my buck, I would focus on this instead of this. Because without that, I'm spending money time after time after time. And it's not good to keep throwing good money after that. Gotta do extra money. Compost tea, this is a great way to add a lot of really good stuff to your soil really quickly. Adds it to your plants really fast. There's a variety of different teas you can use. This one is a more traditional tea. This one contains worm castings, glacial rock powder, and compost. I would actually add this after I've done brewing it to my compost pile because the rock phosphate breaks down and the glacial rock dust break down over a term of 5 years. So as for a tea, it's a really quick boost, but long term, throw it in your dirt. This is compost tea that is mostly herbal based. So these are basically plants like nettles, comfrey, stuff like that. These have been tried and true and been used as compost teas for time immemorial. One of the best things that you can do is when you go through and you do trimming of your plants, somewhere between flower and veg. You go through and manicure everything. You can take all that material, put it in some water, let it sit for about 3 weeks, and then you use that about 10 to 1 with water and use that as compost tea for your plant. And because the nutrients are from the cannabis plant itself, the plant absorbs it and utilizes it almost instantaneously. It's a crazy boost of growth. And this kind of mimics that same thing, except with different plants, comfrey, nettles, and that kind of stuff. Making tea is easy, it's not that difficult. You can get an aeration pump from the local pet supply store and an air stone, 5-gallon bucket, and a tea bag. You can use something, natural or something not. This is a whole whopping $1. So, and if you have a place where you can do composting yourself, you can make your own compost tea from your own compost, and it can be a completely closed loop. I want to talk about this for a minute because it kind of got skipped over. We'll talk about, I may pick it up a little bit, but this is for your fungus gnats, mosquitoes. This works this actually will also work to control some caterpillars because it is still Bacillus thuringiensis. The difference is this is a Bacillus thuringiensis subspecies Rheulinus. Now, because of that subspecies, it works specifically on fungus gnats. If it's not that subspecies, it doesn't work on fungus gnats. So, make sure you look closely on the labels, know what it is you're getting and what you're using it for. So, this is probably the easiest way that you can remediate your clay soil. Colors on your gardening, super simple. Start with cardboard or newspaper. I recommend cardboard and I recommend a lot of it. Smother out whatever you can underneath. Then it just alternates different layers of different things. And then it becomes a mound that you just plant right into it. And then you scrape down over time, and you never have to turn the soil. You don't even have to kill the grass. The cardboard will do it. I recommend if you have very invasive weeds, like the grass, I recommend going it off first with black plastic or tarp or something. Even clear plastic will work, but take it off first. Because there are certain things like the oxalis, like everybody's seen the little shamrock plants with the yellow flowers. Those have these little thorns in the ground, and unless you dig those out, you're never going to get rid of it. So even if you dig it off, you're still not get rid of it. The cool thing is it's only a spring plant, and it's a great cover plant. But this is probably the simplest way that you can just turn everything into delicious biochar. I've used this indoors. I have not tried it outdoors in my garden, but I have seen amazing results. There's people that do use this in their garden. It comes in very many leaves. It is basically a technique that comes from ancient civilizations in Central America where they had really poor soils. They did this. Their soils today are still spectacular. This stuff really works. And why it works is because all these little holes here give a place for all that beneficial bacteria and fungus to live. It also sequesters carbon, purifies the water. So putting this in your soil actually helps purify the water that you're putting in it. So it just acts kind of like a carbon filter from the dirt. So there's a lot of different reasons why I recommend adding it to your dirt. You don't need to add it more than once because it lasts for thousands of years. So just do it once, and that's all you got to do. But I mean, it'll reduce the amount of water and nutrients that you add to your dirt. So over time, your inputs become. And that's really what it is. It's about saving money and saving time. Key elements to success. Mulch, and more mulch. I cannot stress the importance of mulch enough. If you're going outdoors in these things, please stop. If you're growing a fabric version of these things, please wrap your pot in some kind of light-colored fabric or perhaps something like this in order to keep it shaded because anything black is just going to absorb the sun. It's just going to take your roots. So mulching the top of your soil, mulching the top of your pots also helps you keep the roots cool. Keeps the roots moist longer, evaporation. You can use a living mulch or you can use a dried dead mulch or you can use simply perlite or it's up to you. But the more mulch, the better. And if you're growing in dirt, more straw mulch, the better. Because the straw, basically put a foot of straw on the ground and walk around on it. It will compact the soil underneath, it'll give great biological activity, it'll smother everything out, and then as it breaks down, it becomes an amazing planting material. Compost, worm castings, and humic acid. Those are the three things that I could think of that were probably, I think, the most important things you can add. Compost, you can never add too much compost. The more humic matter, the better. High humic soils have better holding capacity for both water and nutrients. So less water, less food, less money you're spending. Worm castings, world's best fertilizer. You can use it as a tea, you can use it as a top dressing, you can mix it in. It does have a lot of humic matter as well. It's very fine humic. So it does hold a lot of nutrients, and I've had burned plants in pots with it.
So that's actually one you need to actually be careful of if it's not going in the ground. Because more than anything, if you water worm castings with some kind of salt-based fertilizer or high nutrient feed, the worm castings absorb it, and it makes it limb burn. Humic acid, this stuff is probably the best pH balancer that you can burn. Cannabis likes acidic soils, and most things rise in pH. Peat moss would be the exception to this. Peat moss actually drops in pH as it decomposes. But most everything else rises in pH as it decomposes, and humic acid is great to help combat that. It also is great food. This is great food for microbes. Calcium, magnesium, iron, and trace minerals. This goes back to the azomite and the green sand. Add those in. They break down over long periods of time. These are the key nutrients. Calcium, magnesium, and iron are the key nutrients that cannabis loves in abundance. So if you can add dolomite lime and green sand, and then the azomite for all the trace minerals, that's all you really need to focus on outside of your basic macronutrients. Integrated pest and disease management. Everybody should have an IPM program, and it should include fungus as well, so IPFM. Have a great book. You could get one too, or you could have at least one IPFM book. Though I think there are some basic things that you can think about using that can keep things from moving. Insect grass is one of those things. That has microbes in it as well, so you can spray it on a plant and it helps with some disease. So I'm going to spray it in some flower, and it gives you that immune response. This is probably my second favorite thing that I add, and this is insecticidal soap. It is a potassium-based soap, basically denotes the bugs. It also helps anything else that you spray on your plants stick. So add soap to anything you spray on your plants, even if it's a couple drops of dish soap. That will act as a surfactant and allow the leaves to be covered in evenly. This stuff kills everything. So it's probably one of my best defenses. It kills everything that's on your plant. It doesn't kill everything that comes to your plant. So I'll talk a little bit about neem oil here for that. I like neem oil, but I also don't like neem oil. The reason I don't like neem oil is because it's kind of like a neocorticate. And that is the stuff that messes with the bees and all the other bugs that go from little larvae into different stages of growth. And that's why it's so effective on things like spider mites, is because it's a growth regulator as well as being, toxic in and of itself. It leaves a residue that when other wood bugs come to, they eat, and it affects them too. So I try really, really hard to use neem oil very selectively, mostly while my plants are indoors under lights. Because as long as I'm not introducing beneficial bugs, I know beneficial bugs aren't going to be planted by it, and any of the bad bugs will show up. Well, we could be there. So I do like neem oil, but I'm very judicious when I use it and how I use it. That's why I like using the insecticidal soap and the insect grass as more local, less pervasive methods. Although one of my favorite things, so I have a good bug, bad bug handout for people. Yes, some turned out better than others, I apologize. So this handout is something that I got when I took my nursery gardening class. And it is great because on one side it has the good bugs for your garden, on the other side it has all the bad bugs, so you can tell the difference. And then I have this cool thing, which is also something that I got from my gardening class. This has these are good guys, and this has a bunch of plants that you can plant in your garden that will attract the good guys. The good guys are your best IPFM, no doubt. If you plant for the good guys, it will make your job so much easier. Plant for the good guys, plant a crop away from your plants for the bad guys, and then keep your plants healthy, with, by using, preventatives and control methods. And you can use, jojoba oil, you can use other horticultural oils. They don't have to be oil. You can use, other oils, and that will smother the bugs on the plants as well. I'm always a little leery of using too heavy an oil because it can clog the stomata on the plants, and it slows down the respiration a little bit. It's good for if you're going to take clones because it will help slow down that respiration so that the clones can move. So there are times in which you can use it for your benefit.
So how far in should you plant the
I would say plant your crop plots in opposite corner of your garden. So if your cannabis plot is over here, your crop should
Trap.
I'm sorry. Your crop should be in the opposite part of your yard. It depends on how big your yard is. I would just say as far away as you can. You know what I mean? Just in the opposite direction, because you want to attract those particular bugs that direction, exactly. So the further away, the better. So this is a visual representation of some training and trellising and things that you can do. Obviously, plants can get to be monster size. This is a couple of examples. There are thousands of examples. Just Google and browse to your heart's content. Come up with something to manage your plants before they get big. Okay? Know what size you want them to be. Prune and train accordingly. You may have to do this before you start flowering in order to make sure that your flowering isn't time to be tall. So have a plan in place, and as you can see, you can have it trained all the way around. See how short these are? You see how wide they are? And they have training all the way around the edges, so all the side branches basically are acting like main pillars. And these will get full sun, and everything is super short. These will get big, I think they top them as well, if they're trained properly. This is part of a two-stage training process. This is basically using a tomato cage for the middle, and then a lot of times people will use wire fencing around the outside with some stakes to hold it in place, and then let the plant grow out. So the center is held in place with one set of wire, and then the outside is held in place with a second set of wire. And these can get as big as you can imagine. There are people that this is like a bamboo square that is just staked up and squared out, and on top, I'm sure there's a grid. And people make them 10, 20, 30 feet wide. So as big as a plant as you want to grow, as big as a plant as you can trellis. But know how big you want your plant to be before you start flowering, because you need to know how much to manage it off and how to manage it. Because you can keep a plant as small as you want it to be just by how you manage it. So managing your common issues, your common pests are mites, thrips, whiteflies, budworms, caterpillars of all kinds, and aphids. Aphids are the easiest to control, mites are the most difficult. If you can control the mites, you can control everything else. Guaranteed. Mites are the most difficult thing, because growers in California have thrown so many chemicals at them, they've become resistant to just about everything. Which is why the natural pest and disease resistance that we can do with the plant, probably the best and easiest form of control of it. The diseases that you're going to face the most are powdery mildew, botrytis, and fusarium. Botrytis is that terrible, terrible thing we all know and love called blood rot. Botrytis is most often from these guys. Bloodworms. Bloodworms are more often than not the cause of your blood rot grows. Get good at identifying what the eggs look like. Get good at looking at your plants every day during that season, mid-August, and look for worms and eggs every single day. You can use things like Ilete's peroxide for mold. So if I do find